While I may be a Nintendo fan, Sega has always had one of my favorite franchises in Streets of Rage. I'm a big fan of beat 'em ups, and I really don't think there's any other series that has done it as well as Streets of Rage has. It looks great, it sounds great, it feels really good to play, and it just never gets old. I can go back and play those original three games over and over and over and still have just as much fun now as I did then. Our friend group continues to talk about those games years and years after they've released, and we all still get together and play them from time to time. We just have such high regard for those original three titles, which is why myself and my friends were so excited to see the announcement of Streets of Rage 4. I couldn't believe after all this time we were getting a new installment. Sega stopped with 3. All 3 came out on the Genesis, and then they were like, well, no more, and it's taken this long to get a 4th installment, so that's a lot to live up to. Was Streets of Rage 4 worth the wait? Rather than be like most reviews and make you go through the whole review to see what I'm going to say, I would tell you right up front, Streets of Rage 4, for the most part, was worth the wait. There's one big caveat and a couple very small caveats, but overall, I really do enjoy the game. Now, as long as you stick around, I'm going to tell you all the reasons why I really enjoy the game and tell you about the one area that really bugs me and the other little issues that I have. Streets of Rage 4 does not try to reinvent the wheel when it comes to beat 'em ups, and I don't think it should because we've been waiting so damn long for a new installment. It's fine for the series to come back and play pretty much as it did back then with a few additions. So there are additions. Your moveset is certainly more varied than it was in the original games, and you have a lot of options for juggling between enemies and punching them to knock them into the air and getting a few more punches in and bouncing between enemies rather than getting caught up with one and getting punched in the back of the head. So you have a lot of options to get out of sticky situations. That doesn't mean the enemies are going to be any easier to deal with, because I actually think they're a lot tougher in this game, especially as you get later on in the game, as it should be. But you feel like you have a lot more control and you feel like you have a lot more power behind you, which is really cool because you can accidentally or on purpose string together some really cool moves and some really cool attacks when you're dealing with a whole bunch of enemies on screen. And then, of course, you have these special moves which will clear out everybody. Well, it hits everybody. It won't necessarily kill them, but you get those by collecting stars throughout the map, and you spend a star to use one of your special moves, so they're limited. And then, of course, you have the super powered move that you can do that will cost you some health as well, which I've never been a fan of in any game, but it's still there. So if you want to do some big damage with a move that doesn't cost a star, you can do that, but you're going to lose some health while you're at it. Now, the most important part is, does it feel good to beat everybody up? Because that's what you do the whole time you're playing one of these games. And yes, I'm very happy to tell you it feels really good. Your punches connect really well, your kicks connect really well. As I said, you have a variety of moves to take enemies out. The flow between your fights feels really enjoyable, and it's just a ton of fun. The way everything comes together makes you feel awesome, and that's what you want in a beat 'em up. You want to feel like a one-man army. You want to feel sometimes unstoppable. You're taking on all these bad guys by yourself if you're playing single player like I was, and you just string together moves and knock people all around and do finishing moves and do suplexes and whatever it may be. And you're like, man, I feel so cool playing this game. So it makes you feel awesome, and it also feels really good to perform the moves. So one of the most important parts of any beat 'em up is fully intact here. Now, does it feel as good as Streets of Rage 2, let's say? That's debatable. The variety of moves here is better, but maybe for some people the sound effects won't be as good for the punches and the kicks, because those old sound effects really had a lot of, pardon the pun, punch to them. Here they still sound good, and they feel good, but I could go back and forth. I could see an argument between either side, but overall, Streets of Rage 4 feels good to play. You can go with a legacy control scheme if you would like, so it controls pretty much exactly as it did on the Genesis, or you can use the expanded control set as well, which is what I used. There's another button in there for picking up items and food, so you don't accidentally pick up food while you're trying to like punch an enemy, because that was a big problem in the originals. You'd go to beat somebody up and accidentally pick up a turkey, and you're like, damn it, I was trying to save that in case I needed it later. Well, that's not an issue here, but a new issue comes up because, say you're picking up a weapon and you want to also pick up maybe a bag of money on the ground or a piece of food. Unless you're not lined up perfectly, you'll end up throwing the item or dropping it, and that happened a lot. I played through the game twice, and it happened to me both times. It's something I just never shook, and I was aware that I had to be perfectly lined up, but it still just happened. So I guess that's better than accidentally eating food, but it's also annoying to have like a weapon you want to hang on to and you throw it away. And enemies can catch weapons, at least some of them, and then they'll throw them back at you or beat the crap out of you with them, so you can get yourself into a pretty bad situation with it. One of the best parts of Streets of Rage 4 is the environments. The stages that you go through feel really good and have an excellent flow to them, and honestly they might be some of the most enjoyable beat 'em up stages I've ever played. I really don't think there's a bummer in the mix, and they're pretty long too. There's a lot to see. You go all over the place in this game. You start out with a traditional street setting, just like the previous Streets of Rage games. It's important to start out with that way, but then it expands into a prison, and there's a rooftop, and there's a sewer, and of course there's an elevator, and a train, and a boat, and so you see things that were in previous games, but you see a lot of brand new stuff. There's some really cool levels later on, settings that I feel like you don't really see in this kind of genre. For example, there's a like an art museum later on that you go through. That is just such an awesome setting. It just feels really unique and different for a beat 'em up. So I have no complaints at all about the settings in this game. They feel fresh, interesting, fun to explore. They all have a couple nooks and crannies where you can find hidden stuff. Yeah, it's probably the best part of the whole game. The game's difficulty is ramped really well. You can pretty much make it through, well, I should say, when it comes to me, I made it through the first 9 stages, or I guess I should say 8 stages on my first playthrough. But when I got to 9, things really dialed up a bit. It was getting more difficult as the game went on through the other stages, but 9 was the first one where I had to continue, or where I had to start over from the beginning of the level, because there's some unique stuff going on. I don't want to spoil too much of it because it is a later stage in the game. You're seeing some footage of it now, but yeah, there's unique stuff going on, and a lot more challenge here. And then from then on out, the challenge really gets going, which I like. You're getting towards the end of the game. It should ramp up, but difficulty throughout the whole game feels really good. I want to beat 'em up that gives me some challenge, and I played on normal setting, and I still feel like I got some challenge. Now, playing a beat 'em up by yourself is always challenging because it definitely helps to have another person with you to take on some of the enemies. So in single player, when you're literally the one-man army, it can get pretty difficult. So I don't know how it would feel with a second player there, but you can change the difficulty as well, and there's multiple difficulty options to really give you a challenge. So if you think you're a professional when it comes to beat 'em ups, you'll be able to really crank it up, and I'm sure get your ass kicked at first, but hopefully you'll learn and get better as you go on. Streets of Rage 4 has a lot of new characters, both playable and enemy-wise, and I'm very happy to say that they all feel good because they feel like they're part of the universe. Sometimes you get a new installment in a series that's been dead for a while, and the people taking it on don't really understand what made the series what it was. So you get new characters and you're like, what the hell? They don't feel right. They don't feel like they're part of the universe. They feel like they were just plopped in. They don't make sense. That's not the case with Streets of Rage 4. The developers did an excellent job of studying what makes Streets of Rage characters and how they feel and their vibe, and then making new ones that fit in with that. The new enemies here are awesome. They feel like a part of Streets of Rage. They feel like they fit with the universe. Their colors, their designs, their attacks, everything about them, they got the right vibe, and they mesh perfectly with the updated old characters that are also available in this game. Same goes for the new playable characters. You will be able to find someone that handles the way you want them to, and they all feel like they belong in Streets of Rage. I played as Cherry Hunter because back in Streets of Rage 2, my favorite character was Skate, and Cherry Hunter and Skate Hunter are obviously related, as is Adam Hunter. And I like fast characters. I like characters that can really move around. And that's exactly what Cherry is. She's not as strong as other characters, but she can get in there, get some hits, and get out of the way. She can bounce around between characters, and she's just really fun to play because she's really frenetic, and that's exactly what I was looking for. So I don't mind not having as good defense or having as strong of attack, because I just like zipping around the stage and just going crazy when I'm beating people up. So it's exactly what I wanted. So you will have no problem finding a character that you want here, and they all feel really good, and they all feel like they fit in this universe. I know Streets of Rage 4 has caught some flack for its visual style, but I am not one of those people. I was down with the look from the first time I saw it, and I think the game looks really gorgeous. I love the rough sketch style of visual, I love the coloring, I love the backgrounds, I just love the artwork in general. The animation is really good. It's gorgeous. I really don't have any complaints about it. I said earlier that the level design might be my favorite part of the game, but that is brought to life through the game's visuals. There's multiple layers and just really, really detailed stuff going on here. Visually, I really can't think of any complaints at all. I never saw a single hint of slowdown or anything like that, so you get an absolutely gorgeous game, and I think it's a smart idea to go with a hand-drawn approach to update a beat-em-up, because they could have certainly gone with pixels, but they decided to, you know, step it up a bit. And the art style, while it may not please everybody, certainly pleased me. I'm really happy with it. As you can tell, I've been leaving one part of the game to discuss for last, or at least towards the end of this review, and that is the game's music. And I'm very sad to say that I really do not like the soundtrack. I have listened to it start to finish a few times now, and I don't dislike it, but it doesn't feel right. It doesn't do it for me. There are a couple songs in there that I'm like, yes, this is what I want. This is a Streets of Rage song. This feels good. But by and large, I don't feel like the soundtrack does it, which is a real shame, because Streets of Rage soundtrack 1 and 2 in particular have been high watermarks for the game industry for a really long time. Obviously, nowadays we have orchestrated soundtracks, and there's plenty of soundtracks out there that are absolutely phenomenal. But just the compositions of Streets of Rage 1 and 2 in particular have stood the test of time. Though Yuzo Koshiro, the main composer on those two games, still puts on concerts to this day for the game's music, so it shows just how popular it is. And he has a handful of contributions here, but the soundtrack comes from a whole bunch of other composers as well. And it misses the mark. When I hear some of the songs, like I said, they get me into the Streets of Rage vibe. But there's a problem. And this is actually a good part of the soundtrack. The soundtrack in each level will build as you're going from section to section, so you get a little bit more to it, or it changes up the tempo or the pace, and I think that's a really cool idea. I really enjoyed it. I think that's a fun element that I really haven't seen in too many games, especially not a beat-em-up. But the problem is, you'll get to a section where you're like, yes, this music is so good, and then that section ends and the level continues, and you're like, so, you know, the song's tempo drops, or some other accompaniment comes in, and you're like, I don't like it as much anymore. It really does pain me to say that I do not like the soundtrack. I don't hate it, but I don't like it. Because for a lot of people, music is one of the most important parts of the Streets of Rage franchise, and I am one of those people. But I really did enjoy the game outside of the music, but yeah, I struggle to find good things to say about the music. There's some good songs in there, but overall, it just doesn't do it for me. If you also don't like the soundtrack, you can switch things over to the original soundtrack, which is certainly going to be much better for a lot of people. It's great to hear those classic tunes. They're still just as good now, but there's still a little issue with that too. Sometimes the songs that are played are odd choices for where you're in. So in the first level, I think it is, when you get to the boss, instead of getting the traditional Streets of Rage 1 or 2 boss music, you get like I believe it's like the final boss music from Streets of Rage 2. I was like, why are they playing that on the first boss already? I don't understand. And then you go into the next level, And the next level has the traditional boss music as its regular stage theme. I was like, why did they make this decision? I don't understand. And then like there's another boss battle later on where they have a Master System version of one of the themes, or maybe it's Game Gear. I don't even know, to tell you the truth. But I was like, man, I feel like they just like stuck their hand in a bag that had like the names of all the soundtrack tunes on them, and they were like, okay, this one goes on level 1, this one goes on level 4. I don't know the rhyme or reason. Sometimes when a setting is close to a setting from previous games, they pick a song from that setting, so that works. But other than that, it seems like they just like threw a dart at a dartboard. Obviously, music is my big issue, but I do have a couple other minor gripes. Sometimes the game gets a little unfair when it comes to holes or like open walls that you can be thrown through, because you won't lose a full life, but you'll lose a large portion of your health. So you could accidentally fall down a hole or get thrown out like of a moving elevator, and you'll plop back right back into the level, get picked up and thrown out again, so it's pretty much like losing a life. So that's a minor issue, but most of the time you can avoid that stuff, and it never became a big problem for me. Also, another minor complaint about the music is the fact that the boss fights don't really have one cohesive boss theme, and the boss fight songs aren't really good. So, you know, when you get to a boss, you're like, yeah, this is going to be a real fight, and you need a song to pump you up, but you don't really get that here. That plays into music overall, obviously, but I feel it's worth noting outside of that because Streets of Rage, as far as the originals go, had some iconic boss music, and they really like set the tone for the battle that was ahead of you. So these boss battles, while they might be fun to play, fall a little flat in the music department. That's it though. That's Streets of Rage 4. I came away, minus music, very impressed with the game. It's a ton of fun to play. I'm really looking forward to playing it with friends, and I have no doubt that all of my friends who are Streets of Rage fans will find the game just as enjoyable to play as I have. I'm really interested to hear what they think of the soundtrack, and interested to hear what you guys think of the soundtrack too, because I might be being extra harsh, and I'm going to listen to the soundtrack more, and it may grow on me as time goes, but this is how I feel right now. But yeah, the game is really enjoyable. Beat 'em ups don't come around too often nowadays, and we haven't had a lot new Streets of Rage in a very, very long time, so it's nice to have the franchise back. I hope this one does really well. I think it deserves to do well, and I hope we get more out of it. It's very nice to see that the developers, at least when it comes to gameplay and design and levels and all that, have a really good idea of what makes Streets of Rage work, because they really nailed it here. It feels like a Streets of Rage game, which is really important. It doesn't feel like an imitator or a copy or anything like that. It feels legitimate. They threw in some little story tidbits in there too, which is interesting. It's never anything that gets in the way, and they're not voiced, which I actually like. It's just written text, and it's like cut-in cutscenes, so it adds a little flavor to it rather than just a text crawl in the beginning and the end. So I actually like that, and I usually don't like that kind of stuff in a game. But yeah, it all comes together to create a Streets of Rage that, for the most part, feels very worthy of the name. If they could just fix the soundtrack, if they were to do a Streets of Rage 5, man, would it be a stellar installment. But soundtrack means so much to me in all games, especially in Streets of Rage, so I have to give it a knock for that. But gameplay-wise, it's the real deal. It feels like Streets of Rage. I hope you enjoy it. I really did enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys think.